A single father's moment of generosity to a desperate pregnant woman becomes the catalyst for an extraordinary discovery that will forever change both their lives. When Marcus gives his last $20 to help a stranger, he thinks it's just another small act of kindness in a world that needs more of them. But when his teenage son stumbles across her photo online weeks later, they uncover a connection so profound it challenges everything they thought they knew about fate, family, and the invisible threads that bind us together. What started as a simple gesture of humanity becomes a journey that will test the very foundation of their relationship and reveal truths that have been hiding in plain sight. Before we dive in, make sure to hit subscribe and leave a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The fluorescent lights in the grocery store checkout line hummed with the kind of tired persistence that matched Marcus Glenn's own exhaustion. He stood behind his cart, watching the digital numbers climb on the register display, each beep another small wound to his already thin wallet. 17-year-old Danny shifted beside him, earbuds dangling around his neck, thumb scrolling through his phone with the practiced indifference of someone who had learned not to watch his father count money. "That'll be $43.78, the cashier said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had repeated those words 1,000 times today. Marcus reached for his wallet, fingers finding the familiar worn leather, and pulled out 2 20s and a handful of crumpled singles. As he counted, his stomach tightened. $44. Exactly. The universe had a sense of humor about these things, always cutting it close, never quite enough to breathe easy. Behind them, a woman cleared her throat. Marcus turned, and the sight hit him like a punch to the chest. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair pulled back in a messy bun and a face that carried the particular exhaustion of someone fighting battles on multiple fronts. But it was her belly that stopped him cold. She was heavily pregnant, maybe 8 months, her hand resting protectively over the curve as she clutched a small basket containing nothing but the basics: milk, bread, a box of generic cereal. Their eyes met for just a moment. Hers were the color of coffee, and they held something he recognized, the particular brand of worry that came with counting dollars and finding them lacking. She looked away quickly, studying the magazines in the rack beside the register, as if they contained the secrets of the universe. Marcus handed over his money, watching the cashier count it twice. The receipt printed with a mechanical whir, and he took it, stuffing it into his pocket without looking. Danny was already heading toward the exit, their bags of groceries distributed between his arms. But Marcus hesitated. The pregnant woman had moved forward, setting her few items on the conveyor belt with careful precision. The cashier scanned them with the same mechanical efficiency: milk, bread, cereal. The total came to $18 and change. The woman opened her pursy, small, worn thing that had seen better years and began counting bills, 1s and 5s mostly. Her fingers worked with the careful deliberation of someone who had done this math already, several times, before getting in line. $17. She counted again, spreading the bills on the counter as if a different arrangement might yield a different result. Her face flushed pink, and Marcus watched her shoulders rise and fall with a breath that seemed to require real effort. "I'm sorry," she said to the cashier, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I had. Could you take off the milk? Just the bread and cereal." The cashier nodded, beginning to ring up the return. But something in the woman's voice, the way it cracked just slightly on the word milk, made Marcus step forward before he could think about what he was doing. "Wait," he said. Both women looked at him. The pregnant woman's eyes widened slightly, embarrassment and confusion mixing in her expression. Marcus pulled out his wallet again, his fingers finding the $20 bill he'd kept back, his emergency money, the buffer that helped him sleep at night knowing he had something, anything, tucked away for the unexpected. "Let me," he said, handing the bill to the cashier. The pregnant woman stared at him, her mouth opening as if to protest, but no words came. The cashier looked between them, clearly accustomed to the small dramas that played out in checkout lines, and processed the payment with practiced efficiency. "Sir, I can't," the woman finally managed. "It's okay," Marcus said, and he meant it. There was something about the way she held herself, the careful dignity in her posture despite the obvious struggle that reminded him of another time, another person who had needed help and been too proud to ask for it. The cashier handed her the receipt and her groceries. The woman looked at Marcus for a long moment, her eyes bright with something that might have been tears. "Thank you," she said, and the words carried more weight than their simplicity suggested. "I'll pay it forward, I promise." Marcus nodded. "Take care of yourself, both of you." She smiled then, the first real expression of lightness he'd seen from her, and headed toward the exit. Danny was waiting by the automatic doors, watching the exchange with the particular intensity that teenagers reserved for moments when their parents did something that might be either admirable or mortifying. "Dad?" he said as Marcus joined him. "Was that the right thing to do?" Marcus finished, pushing their cart toward the parking lot. They loaded the groceries into their 10-year-old Honda Civic in comfortable silence. The evening air carried the first hint of fall, and the parking lot was bathed in the golden light that made everything look like a movie scene. Marcus found himself thinking about the woman, wondering if she had family, if someone was waiting for her at home, if the baby would be okay. "You gave her our emergency money," Danny said as they settled into the car. It wasn't a question, and Marcus didn't treat it like one. "Yeah, the 20 you keep in your wallet." "Yeah." Danny was quiet for a moment, fiddling with his seatbelt. "Mom used to do stuff like that." The words hung in the air between them, unexpected and sharp. They didn't talk about Sarah much anymore, not because they didn't want to, but because sometimes the missing her was so large it took up all the oxygen in the room. "Yeah," Marcus said again, softer this time. She did. They drove home through the familiar streets of their neighborhood, past the houses where porch lights were beginning to flicker on, and families were settling into their evening routines. Their own house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, a small two-bedroom that Marcus had bought when Danny was 10, and Sarah was still alive to help make decisions about things like mortgage rates and property taxes. Inside, they fell into their usual routine. Danny disappeared to his room to tackle homework, emerging only to help put groceries away and grab a plate of leftover spaghetti. Marcus settled at the Kit Glen table with his laptop, spreading out the bills that needed attention and the calculator that would help him figure out how to make everything work with $20 less in his emergency fund. The numbers were tight, they always were, but he'd made it work before, and he'd make it work again. That was what you did when you were the only parent left. You figured it out, 1 month at a time, one decision at a time, and you hoped that the choices you made were teaching your kids something worth learning. Around 10, Danny emerged from his room with a glass of water and stopped at the Kit Glen table where Marcus was still working. "You okay, Dad?" Marcus looked up from his calculator, taking in his son's concerned expression. When had Danny gotten so tall? When had his voice lost the last traces of childhood uncertainty? "I'm fine. Just balancing the checkbook." "About earlier," Danny started, then stopped, searching for words. "I think what you did was cool. Mom would have been proud." The comment hit Marcus unexpectedly, right in the center of his chest where he kept all the doubts about whether he was doing any of this right. He looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw Sarah's eyes staring back at him, the same mixture of compassion and stubborn idealism that had made him fall in love with her 18 years ago. "Thanks, buddy," he managed. Danny nodded and headed back to his room, leaving Marcus alone with his spreadsheets and the quiet satisfaction that came with knowing he'd raised a kid who understood that some things mattered more than money. 3 weeks later, Marcus had nearly forgotten about the encounter in the grocery store. The $20 gap had been absorbed into their budget through a combination of careful meal planning and a small freelance web design job that had come through at exactly the right time. Life had settled back into its familiar rhythm of work, school, and the 1,000 small responsibilities that filled the space between. It was a Saturday morning, and Marcus was in the Kit Glen making pancakes, a weekend tradition that Sarah had started when Danny was small, and that Marcus had stubbornly maintained even when it meant pancakes from a box, instead of the elaborate productions Sarah used to create. Danny was at the counter, laptop open, supposedly working on a history report but actually scrolling through social media with the kind of focused distraction that only teenagers could master. "Dad," he said suddenly, his voice carrying a strange note that made Marcus look up from the griddle. "What's up?" Danny was staring at his laptop screen, his face pale. "You need to see this." Marcus wiped his hands on a dish towel and walked over, looking at Danny's screen. It was a local news website, and the headline made his stomach drop. "Local woman dies in car accident, leaves behind newborn daughter." Below the headline was a photo that hit Marcus like a physical blow. It was the woman from the grocery store, the pregnant stranger he'd helped 3 weeks ago. But in this photo, she was smiling, holding a tiny baby girl. The caption beneath read, "Elena Rodriguez, 26, and her daughter Sophia, born October 20." Marcus sank into the chair beside Danny, his mind struggling to process what he was reading. The article was brief but devastating. Elena had been driving home from a doctor's appointment when another driver ran a red light. She died on impact. The baby, now 3 weeks old, was in the care of the state while they searched for family. "Dad," Danny said quietly, "that's her, isn't it? The woman from the store?" Marcus nodded, unable to speak. He thought about Elena's face in the checkout line, the way she'd held herself with such dignity despite her obvious struggle, the way she'd smiled when she promised to pay it forward. "The baby," Danny said, reading further into the article. "Sophia. She doesn't have anyone. They're looking for relatives, but—" He stopped, his voice catching. Marcus read the rest of the article in silence. Elena had been alone in the world, apparently. No family listed, no father named on the birth certificate. Just a 26-year-old woman who had died 3 weeks after giving birth, leaving behind a baby girl with no one to claim her. The pancakes were burning on the griddle, but neither of them moved to turn off the heat. They sat there in the growing smoke, staring at the photo of Elena Rodriguez and her daughter, while something large and unnamed settled between them. "What happens to her?" Danny asked finally. "The baby." Marcus forced himself to move, turning off the burner and sliding the ruined pancakes into the sink. His hands were shaking slightly, and he gripped the edge of the counter to steady himself. "Foster care, probably," he said, "until they can find her a permanent home." Danny was quiet for a long moment, still staring at the screen. Then he said something that would change everything. "Dad, what if we—" "No." The word came out sharper than Marcus intended. "Danny, no. We can't. That's not how it works." But even as he said it, he was thinking about Elena's face, about the $20 he'd given her, about the promise she'd made to pay it forward. And he was thinking about something else, something he hadn't let himself think about in years. The conversation he and Sarah had had about having another baby, the plans they'd made that had died with her. Danny closed the laptop but didn't move from his chair. Outside, the morning was bright and clear, the kind of October day that made everything seem possible. But inside their Kit Glen, surrounded by the smell of burned pancakes and the weight of an impossible situation, Marcus felt the familiar sensation of standing at a crossroads with no clear path forward. The $20 had been the easy part. This was something else entirely. The phone call came on Tuesday morning while Marcus was getting ready for work. He'd spent the weekend in a strange state of suspended animation, unable to stop thinking about Elena Rodriguez and her baby daughter, but equally unable to figure out what, if anything, he should do about it. Danny had been uncharacteristically quiet since Saturday, speaking only when necessary and spending most of his time in his room. Marcus recognized the sign his son was processing something big, the way he'd done after Sarah's death, turning inward until he could find words for feelings that seemed too large for language. The caller ID showed a number Marcus didn't recognize, but something made him answer anyway. "Mr. Glenn? This is Jennifer Walsh, from Child Protective Services. I hope I'm not calling too early." Marcus nearly dropped his coffee mug. "No, it's what can I do for you?" "I understand. You knew Elena Rodriguez?" The question hit him like cold water. How did you get my name? Your son reached out to us yesterday. He said you had helped Miss Rodriguez shortly before her death, and he thought you might want to know about baby Sophia's situation." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling a mixture of pride and panic. Of course Danny had called. Of course he had taken action while Marcus was still frozen in indecision. "Mr. Glenn, are you there?" "Yes, sorry. Yes, I met Elena once, at a grocery store. I helped her pay for some items." "That's what your son said." "Mr. Glenn, I know this might seem unusual, but would you be willing to meet with me? I'd like to discuss Sophia's situation, and there are some things about Elena that you might want to know." An hour later, Marcus sat across from Jennifer Walsh in a coffee shop downtown, feeling like he was participating in a conversation that belonged to someone else's life. Jennifer was younger than he'd expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of tired competence that suggested she'd seen too much of the world's casual cruelties. "Elena wrote about you," she said without preamble, sliding a folded piece of paper across the table. Marcus stared at it but didn't pick it up. "What do you mean?" "She kept a journal during her pregnancy. We found it in her apartment when we were going through her things. The entry about meeting you is dated 3 weeks ago." With trembling fingers, Marcus unfolded the paper. It was a photocopy of a handwritten page, the ink slightly smudged but the words clear. "October 8th. Something amazing happened today. I was at the store, and I didn't have enough money for everything. I was so embarrassed, ready to put back the milk, when this man, Marcus, I think the cashier called him, just stepped in and paid for everything. He had a teenage son with him, and I could tell they weren't rich. But he gave me his $20 like it was nothing, like it was the most natural thing in the world. He told me to take care of myself and the baby. I wanted to cry right there in the store. I promised him I'd pay it forward, but how do you pay forward that kind of kindness? I keep thinking about his face, how gentle it was. I hope Sophia grows up in a world with more people like him. I hope I can be someone like him for her." Marcus read the entry twice, his throat tightening with each word. When he looked up, Jennifer was watching him with careful attention. "Elena was completely alone," she said quietly. "No family, no support system. The father isn't in the picture. But reading her journal, it's clear that your small act of kindness meant everything to her. She wrote about it several more times." "I don't understand why you're telling me this." Jennifer leaned forward slightly. "Because Sophia needs a family, and Elena wrote extensively about the kind of person she hoped would raise her daughter if something happened to her. The description she wrote matches what your son told me about you." Marcus felt the world shift slightly around him. "You're not suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything yet, but I am asking if you'd be open to learning more about the process, about what it would mean. I'm a single father. I work full-time. My son is 17, he's going to college next year. I can't possibly—" "Mr. Glenn," Jennifer interrupted gently, "Sophia is 3 weeks old. She's healthy, but she's in temporary foster care with people who can't keep her long-term. In 2 weeks, she'll be moved to another home, and then probably another after that. The system is overwhelmed. Good families are rare." Marcus thought about Danny, about the conversation they hadn't finished, about the way his son had taken initiative when Marcus couldn't figure out how to move forward. What would it involve? He heard himself ask. Jennifer smiled for the first time since they'd sat down. A lot of paperwork, background checks, home visits, classes on infant care. It's not simple, and it's not quick under normal circumstances. But Elena's case is unusual. She actually left a letter with her attorney expressing her wishes for Sophia's care. It's not legally binding, but it carries weight. What did she say? That she wanted her daughter raised by someone who understood what it meant to be kind without expectation of reward. Someone who would teach her that helping others isn't something you do when it's convenient, but when it's necessary. The words hung in the air between them, and Marcus found himself thinking about Sarah again, about the way she used to volunteer at the food bank even when they could barely afford groceries themselves. About the way she'd taught Danny to look for people who needed help instead of waiting to be asked. "I need to talk to my son," Marcus said finally. "Of course. Here's my card. Call me when you've decided." That evening, Marcus found Danny in his room, supposedly doing homework but actually staring out the window at nothing in particular. Marcus knocked on the doorframe, and Danny looked up with the expression of someone who had been waiting for this conversation. "You called CPS," Marcus said. "Yeah. Want to tell me why?" Danny was quiet for a moment, then closed his textbook and turned to face his father fully. "Because you were going to talk yourself out of it. Because you always think you can't handle more than what you already have, even when you can." The observation was so accurate it was almost painful. "Danny, this isn't like helping someone buy groceries. This is a baby. A whole person who would depend on us for everything." "I know. You're going to college next year. You'll be gone. It would just be me and Dad." Danny's voice was firm in a way that reminded Marcus suddenly of Sarah. "Do you remember what Mom used to say about family?" Marcus felt his chest tighten. "Which part?" "That family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up when it matters." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the decision settling between them. Outside, the streetlights were coming on, and Marcus could hear the distant sound of kids playing in someone's backyard. "I met with the social worker today," Marcus said finally. Danny's face immediately brightened with hope and anxiety. "And? She showed me something Elena wrote about that day at the store. About us." Marcus pulled out his phone and found the photo he'd taken of Elena's journal entry. He handed it to Danny, watching his son's face as he read. When Danny finished, his eyes were bright with tears he was trying not to shed. "Dad, she wrote about me too? She noticed everything. The way you carried the groceries, the way you watched me help her. She wrote that she hoped Sophia would have a brother like you someday." The words broke something open in Danny's chest. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, not bothering to hide his tears anymore. "What did you tell the social worker?" "That I needed to talk to you first." Danny nodded, understanding the weight of that statement. They were a team, had been since Sarah died. Big decisions got made together, even when one of them was technically still a kid. "I've been thinking about it all weekend," Danny said, "about what Mom would do. And she'd already be buying diapers." Marcus laughed despite himself, because it was true. Sarah had never been one to agonize over doing the right thing. She just did it, and figured out the details later. "It would change everything," Marcus said. "Our whole life. College might have to wait." "No," Danny's voice was firm. "That's not how this works. I'm not giving up college for anything, but I'm also not abandoning a baby sister just because the timing isn't perfect." The word sister hit Marcus like a physical thing. He hadn't let himself think of Sophia that way yet, but hearing Danny say it made something click into place. The social worker said there would be classes, home visits, background checks. It could take months. "How long does Sophia have in the current foster home?" 2 weeks. Danny was quiet for a moment, processing. "That's not very long." "No, it's not. But Elena wrote a letter, right? Saying what she wanted?" Marcus nodded. "It's not legally binding, but Jennifer, the social worker, said it carries weight." "What are you scared of, Dad?" The question was so direct, so much like something Sarah would have asked, that Marcus almost smiled. "Everything. Screwing it up. Not being enough. Not having enough money, enough time, enough, Dad." Danny interrupted gently. "You raised me by yourself for 7 years. You're enough." They talked until almost midnight, going over practical concerns and emotional ones, fears and hopes and the 1,000 small details that would need to be worked out. By the time they said goodnight, Marcus knew what his answer would be, but he also knew he needed one more day to be sure. The next morning, he called in sick to work and drove to the hospital where Sophia was born. He didn't have a plan, exactly, but he needed to see the place where Elena's story had ended and her daughter's had begun. The maternity ward was painted in soft pastels, with inspirational quotes about new beginnings painted on the walls. Marcus walked the hallways, imagining Elena here 3 weeks ago, alone and scared but filled with hope for her daughter's future. At the information desk, he asked about Elena Rodriguez, not really expecting anyone to remember her. "Oh, Elena," the volunteer said immediately. "Such a sweet girl. Are you family?" "No." Two knew her briefly. "I heard about the accident." The woman's face fell. "Terrible thing. She was so excited about that baby." Talked about her constantly, Sophia, right? She showed everyone the ultrasound pictures. Marcus nodded, his throat tight. She didn't have many visitors, but she never seemed lonely, you know? She had these big plans for her daughter, wanted to teach her Spanish and how to garden. She brought a little plant for her room, said she wanted Sophia to see something growing from the moment she was born. The image of Elena, alone in a hospital room but still planning a future for her daughter, nearly broke Marcus's composure. She was a good mother, the volunteer continued. You could just tell, the way she held that baby, looked at her pure love. It's such a shame. Marcus thanked her and walked back to his car, but instead of driving home, he found himself at Riverside Cemetery, where Elena had been buried the week before. The grave was easy to find, a small headstone with her name, dates, and a single line. Beloved mother of Sophia. He stood there for a long time, thinking about the strange chain of events that had brought him to this moment. $20 in a grocery store checkout line, a promise to pay it forward. A son wise enough to take action when his father was paralyzed by possibility. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. I don't know if this is what you wanted, he said to the headstone, but I promise you this, if you trust me with her, I'll love her like she's mine. Danny and I both will. She'll know who you were, what you dreamed for her, and she'll grow up understanding that kindness matters, that showing up matters, that family is something you choose every day. A breeze moved through the trees overhead, and Marcus took it as the only answer he was going to get. That afternoon he called Jennifer Walsh. I'd like to learn more about the process, he said, about what it would take to become Sophia's father. There was a pause, and then Jennifer's voice warm with relief. I was hoping you'd call. When can we meet? The first time Marcus held Sophia, she was sleeping. It had been 6 weeks since that phone call to Jennifer Walsh. 6 weeks of paperwork and background checks, of parenting classes that felt both essential and absurd. He'd already raised one child, but apparently 17 years of experience didn't automatically qualify him for infant care, of home visits where strangers walked through his house and evaluated whether his life was suitable for a baby. Danny had thrown himself into the process with the kind of focused determination he usually reserved for video games or avoiding chores. He'd researched car seats and cribs, had lengthy phone conversations with Jennifer about Sophia's schedule and temperament, and had somehow convinced his guidance counselor to let him do an independent study on child development that would count toward his psychology credit. You know this is real, right? Marcus had asked him one evening as Danny assembled a changing table with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb. More real than anything we've done in years, Danny had replied without looking up from the instruction manual. The foster family caring for Sophia Henderson had been patient and kind, allowing Marcus and Danny to visit 3 times before the placement became official. Mrs. Henderson was a retired nurse who had fostered dozens of babies over the years, and she had a way of talking about Sophia that made it clear she'd grown attached, despite knowing the arrangement was temporary. She's an easy baby, Mrs. Henderson had told Marcus during their second visit. Sleeps well, eats well, hardly fusses except when she's hungry. But she's alert, you know, watches everything. I think she's going to be smart like her mama. Now, on a gray December morning, Marcus sat in the Hendersons' living room with Sophia finally in his arms, and he understood what people meant when they talked about falling in love at first sight. She was tiny, barely 10 pounds, with Elena's dark hair and skin that felt impossibly soft. Her eyes were still the undefined blue of most newborns, but when she looked at him, Marcus felt like she was seeing something important. Danny was beside him on the couch, leaning over to study his new sister with the careful attention he'd once reserved for Pokemon cards. She's so small, he whispered, as if speaking at normal volume might break her. You were smaller, Marcus said, remembering the terrifying fragility of newborn Danny, how he and Sarah had taken turns watching him sleep just to make sure he was still breathing. Can I hold her? Marcus carefully transferred Sophia to Danny's arms, watching his 17-year-old son transform into something gentler as the baby settled against his chest. Danny had always been good with kids she'd babysat for neighbors, had volunteered at the church nursery before Sarah died, but this was different. This was family. "Hey, Sophia," Danny said softly. "I'm your big brother. I know we're not what you were supposed to get, but we're what you've got, and we're going to take really good care of you." Mrs. Henderson appeared with a diaper bag packed with enough supplies to last a month, along with a folder of medical records and feeding schedules. Jennifer Walsh arrived with final paperwork and a car seat that had been inspected 3 times to ensure it met current safety standards. The drive home was surreal. Marcus found himself checking the rearview mirror every few seconds to make sure Sophia was still there, still breathing, still real. Danny had insisted on sitting in the back seat next to her car seat, and he kept up a steady stream of quiet commentary about everything they passed. "That's the library where Dad used to take me for story time. That's the park where we're going to teach you how to swing. That's the grocery store where Dad met your mom." The last observation made Marcus's chest tighten. They decided to be honest with Sophia about Elena from the beginning, age-appropriate honesty that would grow with her understanding. But hearing Danny mention Elena so naturally, as part of Sophia's story rather than something separate from it, felt like a small miracle. Their house had been transformed over the past 6 weeks. Danny's old nursery, which had been converted to a storage room after he outgrew it, was now painted a soft yellow and filled with all the things a baby needed. Marcus had spent 3 evenings assembling a crib, cursing the incomprehensible instructions, while Danny provided commentary and emergency tool retrieval. Now, carrying Sophia across the threshold felt like bringing home more than just a baby. It felt like bringing home the missing piece of something he hadn't realized was incomplete. The first night was exactly as difficult as Marcus had expected, and somehow worse. Sophia, who had been sleeping peacefully at the Hendersons, seemed to sense the change in environment and responded by waking every hour and a half. Marcus stumbled through the dark house, warming bottles and changing diapers with the muscle memory of someone who had done this before, but not recently enough for it to feel natural. Around 3 in the morning, as he walked the hallway with Sophia crying against his shoulder, Danny appeared in his doorway. "Need help?" "I've got it," Marcus said automatically, then reconsidered. "Actually, yeah, can you warm a bottle? The formula's in the kit, Glenn." They worked in comfortable silence, Danny preparing the bottle while Marcus changed Sophia's diaper. It felt like the most natural thing in the world, this midnight teamwork, and Marcus realized that part of what had scared him about raising a baby alone was the aloneness itself. But he wasn't alone. He had Danny, who was choosing to be part of this, even though he could have chosen otherwise. "You don't have to do this," Marcus said as Danny tested the bottle temperature on his wrist. "The night feedings, I mean. You have school." "Dad," Danny said, handing over the bottle, "she's my sister. This is what families do." Sophia latched onto the bottle immediately, her cries stopping as if someone had flipped a switch. In the sudden quiet, Marcus could hear the normal sounds of their house, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of settling wood, the distant sound of traffic on the main road. Besides, Danny added, settling into the rocking chair Sarah had insisted on buying when Danny was born, "I like the night shift. It's quiet. Good thinking time." "What are you thinking about?" Danny was quiet for a moment, watching Sophia eat with the focused intensity of someone learning something new about the world. "College, mostly. Whether I should defer for a year." Marcus nearly dropped the bottle. "What? No, absolutely not. Hear me out. Danny, you've worked too hard for this. You got accepted to 3 schools. You've got scholarships. And I've got a baby sister who needs her family." Danny interrupted gently. "I've been thinking about it for weeks. I could take a gap year, help you get settled with Sophia, work part-time to save money, then go to state next year instead of going away to school." The suggestion was so selfless, so completely like something Sarah would have done, that Marcus felt his throat close up. "Your mother would kill me if I let you give up college for this." "She'd kill you if you didn't let me choose," Danny countered. "And this is my choice, Dad. Sophia didn't ask to lose her mom and I didn't ask for a baby sister, but here we are. I want to be the kind of brother who shows up." They talked in whispers while Sophia finished her bottle, Marcus trying to find arguments against something that felt both wrong and perfectly right. In the end, they agreed that Danny would apply for deferment but keep his options open. If things were going smoothly by summer, he could reconsider. If not, State University would still be there the following year. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that surprised Marcus with its naturalness. Danny took morning feedings before school, allowing Marcus to get a few extra hours of sleep before work. Mrs. Peterson, their next-door neighbor, had volunteered to watch Sophia during the day. She was recently retired and claimed she missed having babies around. Evenings became a family affair. Danny would come home from school and immediately check on Sophia, reporting her daily milestones to Marcus as if she were the most fascinating creature on earth. Which, Marcus was beginning to realize, she was. She smiled today, Danny announced one Thursday in January, bursting through the front door with more excitement than Marcus had seen from him in months. A real smile, not just gas. Mrs. Peterson saw it too. Marcus found himself racing home from work earlier each day, not wanting to miss anything. Sophia was changing, constantly growing more alert, beginning to focus on faces, making small sounds that might someday become words. Every development felt momentous, worth celebrating. It was during one of these quiet evenings, while Danny did homework at the Kit Glen table and Marcus fed Sophia her evening bottle, that the call came. "Mr. Glen, this is Jennifer Walsh. I hope I'm not interrupting dinner." "Not at all. How are you, Jennifer?" "I'm well, thank you. I'm calling because something has come up regarding Sophia's case. Are you available to talk?" Marcus felt his stomach drop. In the weeks since Sophia had come home, he'd almost forgotten that her presence in their lives was still, technically, temporary. The adoption process was ongoing, but so far everything had been routine. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong exactly, but we've had someone come forward claiming to be Sophia's family." The words hit Marcus like ice water. "What do you mean, family?" "Elena's aunt. She lives in Phoenix, and she says she only recently learned about Elena's death and the baby. She's flying in tomorrow and wants to meet Sophia." Marcus looked across the Kit Glen at Danny, who had stopped pretending to do homework and was watching his father's face with growing concern. "What does this mean for us?" Marcus asked. "I don't know yet. Family members have priority in placement decisions, but this woman Rosa Martinez will need to be evaluated just like any other potential guardian. Her claim will need to be verified, her background checked. It's not automatic." But Marcus could hear in Jennifer's voice that it wasn't impossible either. "When will we know more?" "I'll call you after I meet with her tomorrow. Mr. Glen, I want you to know that your family has been exemplary. Sophia is thriving with you, and that matters. Whatever happens, that matters." After he hung up, Marcus stood in the Kit Glen holding Sophia, who had fallen asleep mid-bottle, completely unaware that her world might be about to change again. Danny appeared beside him, his face pale but determined. "What are we going to do?" Marcus looked down at Sophia's sleeping face, at the tiny person who had become the center of their world in just a few weeks, and felt something fierce and protective rise in his chest. "We're going to fight," he said quietly, "if we have to. What if she's really Elena's aunt? What if she's good people?" The question cut to the heart of everything Marcus had been trying not to think about. What if Rosa Martinez was everything Sophia needed? What if she was younger, more financially stable, able to provide opportunities that Marcus couldn't? What if letting Sophia go was actually the most loving thing he could do? "Then we'll figure it out," he said, though the words felt like swallowing glass. "But until we know more, she's ours, and we take care of what's ours." That night, neither Marcus nor Danny slept well. Marcus found himself checking on Sophia every hour, as if memorizing the sight of her in the crib they'd assembled together. Danny made bottles and organized the diaper supplies with nervous energy, preparing for a battle none of them understood yet. And Sophia, oblivious to the adult complexities swirling around her, slept peacefully through the night, for the first time since coming home, as if she sensed that her family needed their rest for whatever was coming. Rosa Martinez was nothing like what Marcus had imagined. He'd spent the morning before their meeting constructing a mental image of Sophia's potential aunt, someone stern and judgmental perhaps, or desperate and unstable, someone he could reasonably argue against. Instead, the woman who sat across from him in Jennifer Walsh's office was soft-spoken and tired, with Elena's same dark hair and the kind of quiet dignity that spoke of someone who had survived difficult things. "I'm sorry I didn't know about Elena sooner," she said, her hands folded carefully in her lap. We lost touch when she moved here. Family politics. You know how it is." Marcus didn't, actually. His own family had been small and uncomplicated, until it was just him and Danny. But he nodded anyway. "She was my sister's daughter," Rosa continued. "Maria died when Elena was 15, and Elena came to live with me for a while. But she was angry about her mother's death, and I was dealing with my own problems. We said things. Did things we couldn't take back." Jennifer leaned forward slightly. "When did you last speak with Elena?" 3 years ago. She called to tell me she was pregnant, but we fought about it. I said some terrible things about her being alone, about how she wasn't ready to be a mother." Rosa's voice cracked slightly. "I was scared for her, but I expressed it badly. She hung up and wouldn't take my calls after that." Marcus found himself studying Rosa's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. Instead, he saw grief, the raw, complicated kind that came from losing someone you loved badly. "How did you find out about the accident?" Jennifer asked. "A friend of Elena's tracked me down through Facebook. Apparently Elena had mentioned me to her before. When this friend saw the news about the accident, she thought I should know." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "I flew out immediately, but by then it had already been 3 weeks. The funeral was over. The baby was in care. I felt like I'd failed her all over again." "What is it you're hoping for now?" Jennifer's voice was gentle but professional. "I want to do right by Sophia. Elena was like a daughter to me for 3 years. I know I failed her when she needed me, but maybe I can be the family Sophia needs now." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Rosa wasn't the villain he'd hoped for. She was just another person trying to navigate an impossible situation, someone whose claim to Sophia was based on blood and regret in equal measure. "Ms. Martinez," Jennifer said, "I need you to understand that Sophia has been placed with the Glenn family for several weeks now. She's bonded with them, and they with her. Any transition would need to be handled very carefully, if at all. I understand. I don't want to hurt her. I just want to meet her, to see if there's a place for me in her life." The meeting ended with plans for Rosa to visit Sophia at Marcus's house the following day. As they walked to their cars, Marcus found himself struggling with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "She seems nice," Danny said quietly. He'd insisted on coming to the meeting, despite Marcus's protests that he should be in school. "Yeah, that makes it harder, doesn't it?" Marcus stopped walking and looked at his son. "What do you mean?" "It would be easier if she was awful. Then we could just fight to keep Sophia without feeling bad about it. But she's not awful. She's just sad." That was exactly what Marcus had been thinking, and hearing Danny articulate it made the situation feel even more complicated. "What do you think we should do?" Marcus asked. Danny was quiet for a long moment, watching traffic pass on the street in front of the CPS building. "I think we should let her meet Sophia and see what happens. But Dad, Sophia is ours now. Whatever happened between Rosa and Elena, that's their story. Sophia's story started with us." The next day, Rosa arrived at their house carrying a small gift bag and wearing the expression of someone who was trying not to hope too hard for something. Marcus led her into the living room, where Sophia was sleeping in her bouncy seat, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of a home with a new baby burp cloths draped over furniture, toys scattered on the coffee table, the general sense that everything had been rearranged around the needs of someone very small. "She's beautiful," Rosa whispered, kneeling beside the bouncy seat without touching Sophia. "She looks just like Elena did as a baby." Marcus watched Rosa's face as she studied Sophia, seeing the complex mixture of love and loss that crossed her features. When Sophia stirred and opened her eyes, Rosa inhaled sharply. "Hello, mija," she said softly. I'm your tia Rosa. I loved your mama very much. Sophia, who had recently started focusing on faces, stared at Rosa with the serious attention she gave to everything new. Marcus found himself holding his breath, as if Sophia's reaction would somehow determine everything that came next. "Can I hold her?" Rosa asked. Marcus nodded, carefully lifting Sophia from her seat and placing her in Rosa's arms. The older woman held her with the confidence of someone who had raised children before, speaking to her in a mixture of English and Spanish that Sophia seemed to find soothing. "Elena always wanted her daughter to know Spanish," Rosa said, not looking up from Sophia's face. "She was proud of our heritage, even when she was angry with the family." Danny appeared from the Kit Glen with coffee for everyone, settling into the chair across from Rosa with the careful attention of someone gathering intelligence. "What was Elena like as a kid?" he asked. Rosa smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. "Stubborn. Smart. She wanted to save the world, even when she was little. When she was 7, she tried to start a neighborhood recycling program, went door to door with a wagon, collecting bottles and cans. Most adults would have just patted her head and sent her home, but Elena had this way of talking to people that made them want to help her." Marcus felt his chest tighten. It was exactly how he'd imagined Elena based on her journal entries, someone who saw problems and tried to fix them, even when the problems were bigger than she was. "She was going to college," Rosa continued, still holding Sophia. "Full scholarship to study environmental science. But when Maria died, Elena fell apart for a while. I tried to help, but I was dealing with my own grief, my own kids. I wasn't patient enough, wasn't good enough at understanding what she needed." "What happened between you?" Danny asked gently. Rosa was quiet for a long moment, rocking Sophia with an automatic motion. "Elena wanted to take a gap year before college to process her mother's death. I thought she was making a mistake, that she needed structure, purpose. We fought about it constantly. Finally, she said I was trying to control her life the same way her mother had, and I said some things about her being ungrateful and irresponsible. She moved out the next day." Marcus could picture Itwo grieving people talking past each other, both trying to do right by Elena's memory and succeeding only in driving Elena away. "I called her sometimes, sent birthday cards, but she never responded. When she called about the pregnancy, I was so surprised I handled it all wrong. I was worried about her being alone, about how she'd support a baby, and instead of offering help, I criticized her choices. It was the last time we spoke." Rosa looked up from Sophia, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I know you don't know me, and I know Sophia has a good home with you. But I need to try to do better by her than I did by Elena. I need to try to be the family member Elena needed and never got from me." The room was quiet, except for Sophia's small sounds and the distant hum of neighborhood life outside. Marcus found himself in the strange position of wanting to comfort the woman who might take his daughter away. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked finally. "I'm thinking about what Elena would want," Rosa said. "And I know she'd want Sophia to be loved and safe and happy. She wrote about you in her journal, did you know that? The social worker showed me copies. Elena believed in kindness, in people who help without being asked. She believed you were that kind of person." Marcus exchanged a glance with Danny, who was listening with the intense focus he usually reserved for video games. "She also believed in family," Rosa continued. "Not just blood family, but chosen family. People who show up when it matters." "What are you saying?" Danny asked. Rosa looked around the room, taking in the baby supplies and the comfortable chaos, the evidence of a life that had been reorganized around Sophia's needs. "I'm saying that Sophia already has a family. You've shown up for her when she needed it. You've given her a home, a brother, a father who reads her Elena's journal entries so she'll know who her mother was." Marcus felt his breath catch. "How did you know about that?" "Mrs. Peterson mentioned it when I talked to her yesterday. She said you read to Sophia every night sometimes, children's books, sometimes passages from Elena's journal about the kind of person she hoped Sophia would become." It was true. Marcus had started the habit without really thinking about it, wanting Sophia to hear Elena's voice somehow, to know she was loved by her birth mother even if she couldn't remember her. "The thing is," Rosa said, adjusting Sophia in her arms. "I live in Phoenix. I work 2 jobs, and my own kids are teenagers who need me. I could take Sophia, could disrupt all of your lives, could take her away from the only stability she's known. But what would that accomplish besides making me feel better about not being there for Elena?" The room was so quiet Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. "What are you proposing?" Jennifer asked. She'd been silent through most of the visit, letting the adults navigate their own path to whatever came next. "I'm proposing that Sophia stay where she is," Rosa said firmly. "With her real family. But I'd like to be part of her life, if you'll let me. I'd like her to know her history, her culture, her mother's family. I'd like to visit sometimes, to send birthday presents, to be Tia Rosa instead of a stranger." Marcus felt something massive shift in his chest, relief and gratitude, and something like awe at the grace Rosa was showing. "Yes," he said immediately. "Yes, of course. Sophia should know all of her family." Danny was grinning now, the tension that had been holding his shoulders tight for days finally releasing. "Can you teach her Spanish?" he asked Rosa. "Elena wanted that for her." "I'd love to," Rosa said, looking down at Sophia with pure affection. "And I can tell her stories about her mama, about the family she came from. But she'll grow up knowing that her real family, the people who chose her and fought for her, are right here." Later, after Rosa had left with promises to visit again in a few months and to call regularly, Marcus and Danny sat on the couch with Sophia between them. The house felt different somehow, not just because a potential crisis had been averted, but because their family had grown in an unexpected way. "I like her," Danny said, touching Sophia's tiny hand with one finger. "Me too. Do you think Elena would be okay with all this, with how everything worked out?" Marcus thought about Elena's journal entries, about her hope that Sophia would grow up in a world with more people like the stranger who had bought her groceries. He thought about Rosa's choice to prioritize Sophia's well-being over her own grief, and about the way their small family had somehow become larger without anyone being displaced. "I think she'd be proud," he said finally, "of all of us." Sophia chose that moment to grab Danny's finger and hold on tight, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. She looked up at both of them with the serious attention she gave to important things, as if she understood that something significant had just been decided about her future. "Welcome home, baby sister," Danny whispered. For real this time. And Marcus, holding his daughter while his son made faces to make her smile, felt the deep satisfaction that came with knowing they'd found their way to exactly where they were supposed to be. 2 years later, Marcus stood in the Kit Glen of their house, watching Danny pack a suitcase with the methodical precision of someone who had been planning this moment for months. Outside, the August heat shimmered off the pavement, and Sophia sat in her high chair, systematically destroying a piece of toast while providing commentary in the mixture of English and Spanish that had become her primary mode of communication. "Mas," she announced, holding up the mangled remains of her breakfast. "More, please." Marcus corrected automatically, then caught himself. Rosa had been right about the importance of Sophia maintaining her mother's language, and he'd grown to love the musical quality of Sophia's bilingual chatter. "Danny go?" Sophia asked, pointing at the suitcase. "Danny's going to college," Marcus explained for the 10th time that morning. "Remember? We talked about this." Sophia's face crumpled with the particular devastation of a 2-year-old who had been told something she didn't want to hear. Danny immediately abandoned his packing and swept her out of the high chair, spinning her around until her tears turned to giggles. "I'm not going far, Pequeña," he said, settling her on his hip. "Just 2 hours away. And I'll come home lots of weekends, especially when Tia Rosa visits." Sophia considered this, her small face serious as she processed the information. Then she grabbed Danny's face with both hands and planted a wet kiss on his cheek. "Danny come back?" "Always," Danny promised. "I'll always come back." Marcus turned away, pretending to be busy with the dishes while he composed himself. The past 2 years had been a study in controlled sleepless nights that gradually became manageable sleep, the constant learning curve of raising a daughter while navigating the emotional complexities of honoring Elena's memory, the slow process of building traditions that belonged to their particular family. Danny had deferred college for 1 year, as planned, but that year had stretched into 2 when Sophia had gotten sick with pneumonia at 15 months and needed constant care. Then Danny had decided he wanted to go to State University after all, which meant staying close enough to be part of Sophia's daily life while still getting his education. The compromise had worked better than anyone expected. Danny had matured during those 2 years in ways that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with responsibility chosen rather than imposed. He'd learned to change diapers and braid hair, to read the same bedtime story 17 times without losing patience, to translate Sophia's increasingly complex emotional needs into something Marcus could understand. "She's going to miss you," Marcus said as Danny returned to his packing. "She's going to miss having someone to boss around," Danny corrected, "but she'll adapt. Kids are resilient." It was something they'd all learned over the past 2 years about resilience, about adaptation, about the way families could be built from the most unlikely materials and somehow become stronger than families that had started with traditional foundations. The adoption had been finalized 6 months ago, a quiet ceremony in a courtroom with Jennifer Walsh as witness and Rosa participating by video call from Phoenix. Sophia had worn a white dress that Rosa had sent for the occasion and had spent most of the hearing trying to eat the judge's gavel. Afterward, they'd gone to Elena's grave as a family. Marcus had brought flowers, Danny had brought a photo of Sophia from her second birthday party, and Sophia had brought a handful of dandelions she'd picked from their yard. They'd told Elena about the adoption, about Rosa's visits, about Sophia's first words and steps, and the way she laughed when Danny played peekaboo. "We're doing okay," Marcus had said to the headstone. "All of us. I hope that's what you wanted." Now, watching Danny fold his college sweatshirts with the same care he'd once used to organize Sophia's baby clothes, Marcus felt the bittersweet recognition that this was what success looked like: your kids growing up enough to leave, confident that they could find their way back home. "Dad," Danny said without looking up from his packing, "you know you don't have to do this alone, right? Sophia, I mean. You've got Mrs. Peterson next door, and Rosa's planning to visit more often now that I'll be gone. And I'm 2 hours away, not 2 countries." Marcus nodded, though part of him was terrified of the prospect of single parenting, a toddler without backup. Danny had been his partner in this endeavor from the beginning, sharing night feedings and doctor visits and the 1,000 small decisions that came with raising a child. The thought of making all those choices alone felt overwhelming. "Besides," Danny continued, "Sophia's not a baby anymore. She's got opinions about everything. She'll keep you busy enough that you won't have time to miss me." As if summoned by her name, Sophia appeared in the doorway, having escaped from her high chair with the efficiency of someone who had been practicing. She surveyed Danny's suitcase with the serious attention she gave to all important matters. "Danny's clothes," she observed. "That's right. Danny's taking his clothes to school." Sophia climbed onto Danny's bed and began removing items from the suitcase with the helpful efficiency of someone who clearly believed she was being useful. "No," she announced, holding up a t-shirt. "Danny, stay." "Sophia, no," Danny said gently, beginning to repack. "Danny has to go to school so he can learn important things." "What things?" It was Sophia's favorite question, the one she applied to everything from why she had to wear shoes to why the sky was blue. Danny had gotten good at providing answers that satisfied her 2-year-old logic without oversimplifying. "I'm going to learn about computers and how to build things with them. And about psychology, which is understanding how people think and feel." Sophia considered this information with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. "Like me? Especially like you," Danny said, scooping her up and tickling her until she shrieked with laughter. "I'm going to learn all about how little sisters think so I can be the best big brother ever." The doorbell rang, interrupting the conversation. Marcus went to answer it, finding Mrs. Peterson on the front step with a casserole dish and the expression of someone who had been waiting for an excuse to help. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing over the dish. "Moving day is always chaotic, and I know Sophia hasn't been eating well with all the changes." Mrs. Peterson had become an unofficial grandmother to Sophia over the past 2 years, providing childcare when Marcus worked and backup support when Danny was in school. She was the kind of neighbor who noticed when you forgot to bring in your mail and who always seemed to have extra cookies when toddlers came visiting. "You don't have to," Marcus started. "Nonsense. That child has brought more joy to this neighborhood than you know. The least I can do is make sure she eats her vegetables while you're adjusting to being a single parent again." The phrase, "single parent again," hit Marcus with unexpected force. He'd been a single parent before, with Danny, but that had felt different, like survival, like making do with what was left after loss. This felt more like choice, like confidence, like knowing he could handle whatever came next, because he'd already proven to himself that he could handle more than he'd ever imagined. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of last-minute packing and final preparations. Danny loaded his car with boxes and suitcases, while Sophia supervised from her stroller, offering commentary on everything that was happening around her. "Careful with that," she told Danny as he carried his computer to the car. "Important. Very important," Danny agreed seriously. "Good catch, Sophia." When it was time for Danny to leave, they all gathered in the driveway for goodbyes. Sophia had been prepared for this moment, but the reality of watching Danny get into his car clearly hit her differently than she'd expected. "Danny come back?" she asked again, her voice smaller than usual. "I'll come back next weekend," Danny promised, kneeling down to her level. "And you can call me every day if you want. Dad has my number in his phone." Sophia nodded solemnly, then launched herself into Danny's arms for a hug that seemed to contain everything she couldn't yet put into words. Marcus watched his children hold each other and felt the particular pride that came with knowing he'd raised a son who understood that love was something you expressed, not something you assumed. "Take care of Dad, okay?" Danny whispered to Sophia. "He's going to miss me too." "I take care," Sophia promised with the fierce determination of someone accepting a sacred trust. Then Danny was hugging Marcus, and Marcus was remembering the last time he'd said goodbye to one of his children. How different this felt from those first terrifying days of single parenthood after Sarah's death. "I'm proud of you," Marcus said, "not just for going to college, but for everything. For the man you've become." "I learned from the best," Danny replied. And Marcus knew he was talking about more than just parenting skills. They watched Danny's car disappear around the corner, Sophia waving enthusiastically until it was completely out of sight. Then they stood in the quiet driveway, father and daughter, feeling the space where Danny had been. "Danny at school?" Sophia announced, as if confirming the information for herself. "That's right, Danny's at school. We okay?" The question, delivered with Sophia's characteristic directness, made Marcus smile. It was exactly what he'd been wondering himself. "Yeah, baby girl, we're okay." That evening, after Sophia had eaten dinner, with only moderate protests about the vegetables, and had her bath, with extensive negotiations about how many toys were necessary for proper hygiene, Marcus found himself in the rocking chair in her room, reading her bedtime story while she settled against his chest with the boneless relaxation of someone who was completely secure in her place in the world. Tonight's book was one Rosa had sent from Phoenix, a bilingual story about a little girl who could speak to animals. Sophia knew it by heart but still insisted on hearing it read aloud, correcting Marcus when he mispronounced the Spanish words. "Elena," Sophia said suddenly, pointing to the illustration of the little girl in the story. It was something she'd started doing recently, identifying Elena in random places, as if she understood that her birth mother was someone important she should remember, even though she had no actual memories of her. "You think the little girl looks like Elena?" Marcus asked. Sophia nodded seriously. "Elena mama, you daddy? Danny brother." "That's right. Rosa tia. Mrs. Peterson abuela." Marcus smiled at Sophia's expanded definition of family. She'd gotten into the habit of assigning familial roles to all the important adults in her life, creating a network of relationships that made sense to her 2-year-old understanding of how the world should work. "And who are you?" Marcus asked, though he knew the answer. "Sophia," she said with satisfaction. "I'm Sophia." After she fell asleep, Marcus sat in the quiet house, feeling the particular solitude that came with being the only adult in a space that had been shared. The house felt larger somehow, as if Danny's absence had created physical space as well as emotional space. His phone buzzed with a text from Danny. "Made it to campus. Roommate seems cool." "Sophia doing okay?" Marcus typed back. "She's asleep. Asked about you 3 times during dinner." "We're good. Love you both. See you this weekend." Marcus set the phone aside and walked through the house, turning off lights and checking locks with the automatic routine of someone who had done this thousands of times. In Sophia's room, he paused to watch her sleep, marveling at how completely peaceful she looked, how utterly trusting. This was what Elena had wanted for her daughter, not just safety and care, but this particular kind of peace that came with knowing you were exactly where you belonged. Marcus thought about the chain of events that had brought them to this moment. $20 in a grocery store, a promise to pay it forward, a son wise enough to take action when his father couldn't see the path forward. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, navigating toddler tantrums without backup, managing work schedules without Danny's flexibility, all the small daily negotiations that came with raising a strong-willed 2-year-old. But tonight, in the quiet house where a father and daughter were learning to be a family of 2 instead of 3, Marcus felt the deep satisfaction that came with knowing some promises were kept not once, but every day. Outside, the neighborhood settled into evening quiet, porch lights flickering on and families gathering around dinner tables and homework assignments. And in the small house at the end of the cul-de-sac, a man who had learned that kindness was something you practiced rather than something you felt sat in his daughter's doorway, watching her sleep, and understanding finally that love was not just something you felt but something you chose, again and again, until choosing became as natural as breathing. The kindness you show to strangers, he thought, remembering Elena's words, has a way of coming back to you in forms you never expected.